Millions of Americans, and probably everyone watching this, has been to a national park. Seeing our country's national parks is one and the same with seeing how our government works to preserve the nation's beauties. This is a result of a conservationist and environmentalist movement in the late 1800s. This movement was led by John Muir, often known as the father of national parks, whose writing and work advocating for the protection of land are what helped get Theodore Roosevelt on board with the movement and the legislation needed passed to conserve our parks forever.
John Muir immigrated from Scotland in 1849 with a deeply religious father. He began studying botany and chemistry at the University of Wisconsin, where his interest in nature began to bloom. However, it was not until after an accident in 1867 while working in a wagon wheel factory that he pursued his dream. His cornea was cut when a file slipped and he was condemned to a dark room for 6 weeks to recover. He took this as a sign from God that he should leave normal life and spend his time exploring nature. He began this with a 1,000-mile walk from Kentucky to Florida. His most notable influence came after he moved to San Francisco and began exploring the Yosemite backcountry and soon became a local expert. He initially worked there for a summer as a shepherd, which made him realize that the grazing of domesticated livestock was currently the greatest threat to the landscape. With the help of Robert Underwood Johnson, an editor for The Century magazine, Muir was able to lobby Congress to pass a bill in 1890 to protect Yosemite Valley, but it still left it under state control. Yosemite had previously been designated as a protected wilderness area since 1864, when President Lincoln signed into law the Yosemite Valley Grant Act. The Yosemite Board of Commissioners was created to oversee this area. Among its members was landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. He raised concerns about the impacts of overuse of the wilderness, but his comments were ignored. Yosemite quickly became a nationwide tourist hub, and the natural beauty of it became harder to maintain. In 1892, Muir co-founded the Sierra Club as a way to gather mountaineers together, but it quickly became a political force at the national scale. Their first major battle was over the construction of the O'Shaughnessy Dam on the Tuolumne River. The proposed project would flood Hetch Hetchy Valley to create a reservoir for San Francisco. The valley had previously been compared to Yosemite Valley for its beauty, but no more. Despite it being in a national park, Woodrow Wilson supported the project and the bill to build the dam passed in 1913. This was a major loss, but it contributed to support for the founding of the National Park Service in 1916, which had a Sierra Club member as its first director. This marked a turning point from conservation to preservation.
Inspired by the work he had done, Theodore Roosevelt asked Muir to take him to Yosemite. In 1903, they roughed it for 3 days, and when the president returned to Washington, he was determined to preserve America's wild assets for the public through law, thus the Antiquities Act of 1906.
With the introduction of the Antiquities Act in 1906 under Theodore Roosevelt, it was declared as national policy to declare by public proclamation historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic or scientific interest to be national monuments. This act has been used to protect some of America's most notorious monuments, such as Grand Canyon National Park, Zion National Park, and Devil's Tower National Monument. This protection of land slowly turned into the National Park Service in 1916 when President Wilson signed the Organic Act on August 25th, making the National Park Service a new federal bureau in the Department of the Interior. The National Park Service was put in charge of guarding the nation's recreational resources and culture, along with leading in environmental issues and preservation. Soon, the service moved beyond just land to include historic sites, buildings, and objects of national significance through the Historic Sites Act of 1935. The National Park System includes 418 sites covering 48 million acres across the continental U.S., Hawaii, Alaska, Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Saipan, and the Virgin Islands. Only 60 of these sites have the true title of a national park. One of the more peculiar sites protected by the government is a former leprosy colony on one of Hawaii's islands. When an outbreak of leprosy was introduced on the Hawaiian Islands, King Kamehameha V banished all those contaminated by the disease to the Kalaupapa Peninsula on the north shore of Molokai. What started out as a prison and a place of death and despair became a refuge for those remaining on the island that are cured. The island is now a beautiful place with rich culture worth protecting through the National Park Service.
By 1950, there were 28 national parks across the United States, and with the development of Route 66 in 1926 and the mid-20th century bringing more reliable and accessible cars, the modern road trip began to take shape. Families began using their trusty vehicle to more than their daily commute and taking them out to see the nation's beauties in their leisure time. With the end of World War II and improvements in cars, national parks had huge jumps in visitation. Road trips became quintessential to the typical American life, and national parks became their destinations. Previously, they were visited by an average of 5 million people per year, but after 1945, visitation reached 20 million and continued to go up every year. In 2018, over 318 million people visited a national park, and the number only continues to go up. With rising popularity, the different types of recreation managed by the National Park Service increased too. The recreation varies from every park, but every imaginable outdoor activity is available. The snow sports range from skiing, snowboarding, ice climbing, ice skating, dog sledding, snow play, tubing, snowmobiling, and horseshoeing. Additionally, in the warmer months, you can run, climb, hike, bike, and camping is available at over 130 locations. When it comes to the water, you can swim, snorkel, dive, water ski, and much more. Nationwide enjoyment of nature, including activities like these, have been made possible by the preservation of beautiful lands such as Yosemite and the Grand Canyon, which would have been destroyed by extractive industries and tourism if it weren't for government protection. Men like John Muir believed that nature should be enjoyed by all, and national parks became a perfect way to make tourism a thing of protection and appreciation instead of a thing of over-consumerism and destruction.